Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Stephanie. Thank you also, Madeleine, and thank you, Suzanne, for the intro and for the very insightful presentations already. Now it's my turn to give you a bit more detail on that. Um, Who's iPoint? iPoint is a product sustainability and product compliance company helping companies of big scale, small scale in achieving product sustainability and product compliance. And it's really digitizing the entire product lifecycle to ensure that products are compliant with legislation and achieving product sustainability, as we have heard quite a bit already. And we consider ourselves really an innovation leader. So we love to co-create with our customers and go a step, an extra mile together with them to get to truly sustainable products. And my turn is now to give you a bit more insights on what is exactly an LCA and why it is important. But don't worry, it's not going to be a lecture. Lifecycle assessment and product carbon footprint are very closely linked. So it's about the identification of environmental impacts of a product or a service over its entire life cycle. And the life cycle we see here, and it was also reflected with the scope 1, 2, and 3, and we will see how this is connected. People who have worked with life cycle assessment have heard of ISO standards. ISO standard 14040, 44, or ISO 14067. And you have heard of different impact categories. And you can have really different system boundaries. Sometimes people are talking about cradle to grave, because we're throwing away so many things and our recycling rate is comparably low for many products, even if we are trying to fully enable circular economy. And sometimes the requirement, if you are somewhere in the middle of the supply chain, you are asked to do a life cycle assessment or a product carbon footprint cradle to gate, which would be until where it leaves your production site and you are sending it to your customer, especially if you are a components manufacturer. That could be the case. And within lifecycle assessment, credibility of the results is a very important issue and target. And so in those standards, there is a reference to critical review, meaning a sort of verification, especially if you want to communicate externally and compare product life cycle assessments or product carbon footprints and disclose that to the public. So in total, LCA is a very holistic approach that helps you to understand also trade-offs between different environmental impacts. What does that mean? When you do a full life cycle assessment, you have various impact categories. You have climate change, which is the impact category number 1 nowadays, and that is expressed in CO2 equivalents that allow you to measure the global warming potential of a product or of a service. But you can also have others. Some are referring to water, like acidification or eutrophication, or to whole ecosystems like ecotoxicity, but also to resource depletion. So you have multiple categories, and not all of them are of the same importance for each product. And so you want to understand that. But to understand the relationship between life cycle assessment and product carbon footprint in an easy one sentence, a product carbon footprint is an LCA only focusing on the impact category climate change. And now please remember the scope 1, 2, 3 picture that you have already seen in similar ways twice in the presentations. This is now showing you how the product perspective links to the corporate carbon footprint perspective. The whole wording of scopes, scope 1, 2, scope 3 upstream, scope 3 downstream, is wording derived from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the corporate greenhouse gas accounting standard that is mostly used in the world. And you can connect that with the product perspective by considering your life cycle stages. Material acquisition and pre-processing are reflected as a part of the upstream scope 3 emissions. Your own main production are reflected in scope 1 and 2 as a part, not the complete one. And the same is true for downstream scope 3 emission. One product takes a share of the distribution and storage, the use stage, and the end of life stage. And if in the end of life you have recycling, then there may be flows going back, but for simplification, that is not visible. And you have several standards here related to that you can use and that are helpful to do that. And why is this carbon reduction in focus? So many companies, and we have seen it also with Xylem, every company nowadays has sustainability targets, and the net zero, the carbon reduction targets with different years in the future are everywhere in every sector. What does LCA ensure us? And it ensures us, these are the sustainability, the global targets, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And my personal favorite of visualizing them is the SDG wedding cake, because you can see all the environment-related SDGs as the basis, and all the society-related as the next layer, and all the economy-related as the top layer. And the very top is collaboration. And within the sustainability strategy of an organization, you identify those of each of the layers, which is the most relevant for your organization. And from these, you can then derive your targets: low carbon, more circular, fully circular, or also say, toxic free, that then affects humans and also the environment less in an ideal world. How do we address the challenges that have been raised by Stephanie of achieving sustainable products? And we need to know, or you need to know, as a producing company, as a manufacturing company, your product, your suppliers, and the related impact to your product, and from which suppliers you may buy things, or you collaborate with downstream your supply chain, where this impact derives from. It's about transparency. But there's a lot of complexity involved in that, in a very complex value chains across countries, different regulations, different energy systems in place. So there's huge complexity. And therefore, especially until now, it was a very time-consuming, cost-intensive, and also with many data gaps, foreseen activity. And as of today, the required expert knowledge is a scarce source, a human source that we can see in the market. And therefore, iPoint is dedicated really to fully automate the life cycle assessments. And if you look at that at the top scale, at the top line, that would have been the classical LCA: one product, 30 days, 500 products, 1,500 days. It's 7.5 billion per year. It's a bit too expensive. If you can go down to one product with an automation to 6 days, that already gives a huge saving. And we are working in very different sectors, and that is more or less an average between automotive, electronics, and chemical sector. If we look in the electronic sector, it could even be more. But let's focus on the automation. For a sustainable product on a big scale, what do you need to do? First of all, you need to identify the data sources where data comes from your supply chain, internal data, secondary databases, your CAD systems, your ERP systems. And we need to create, and I say in this case, normally we are involved in that as iPoint, supporting creating the models that enable the analyzing and the calculation. And then you have different types of users: the engineer, the LCA expert, individual reports, the customers. Also API-based connections are possible. And even there, you can get a verified, critically reviewed LCA out of that. How we are getting there? We need to make a model. And I took here the example of the Xylem product. And this model is not only able to calculate one pump, it is already able to calculate several pumps. So, and we call that a generic model, as Stephanie referred to as modified LCA, so that you have different parameters that allow you to modify in the same model and calculate multiple similar products. And what you can see in such models, and why not only a graph is interesting, sometimes it's interesting to really see where in the production system the impact occurs. So what I'm showing now is the impact Sankey diagram and the CO2 equivalents coming out of the use phase. And you remember that I mentioned the topic trade-offs. Trade-offs, if I look at a different impact category, ecosystem quality, terrestrial eutrophication, you see that also the supply chain is sharing some impact. And when you take decisions on the future, you don't want to only look at CO2, you want to not make things worse on another end. And that's what LCA enables you. And generic models allow us to do one model for multiple products and components that are similar. And similar can be in a very wide range, using similar components in general. And that is what enables us to really reduce the effort in doing product carbon footprints and life cycle assessment. Allows us to automate that. The success factors for that are the demand for sustainable products really trickles down the supply chain. So more and more companies are really getting fully alert to that, and you're no longer alone. You're not exotic. You can talk to sustainability managers across the supply chain, and you start to speak the same language. But what is absolutely necessary, that sustainability is on the agenda of the top management. Stephanie said it's in our DNA. That means it's in all KPIs and it's everywhere. And the LCA is used to offer the complete picture to avoid the burden shifting and the carbon reduction measures. At the product level is where is the greatest leverage in the scope 3. You have done your homework. Most of manufacturing companies have always done energy savings and improving their on-site production. So there are very few low-hanging fruits left there. And therefore, automation is a prerequisite to face future requirements. And with that, I'm giving back to Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Martina. Lots of great insight here, and it's for sure lots of efforts behind creating an automated LCA and a product carbon footprint to calculate that thoroughly. But what would you say is the absolutely must-do steps to get started if you are thinking this looks a little bit overwhelming, but I need to get there?
Getting top management really on your as a backup, and ensure that you have a cross-functional team also internally. You as a sustainability manager, you cannot do it alone. Having your IT people, your purchase people, your sales people on board, and even if as a sustainability manager you drive that project, cross-functional team and commitment with top management. That's how you get started.
Thank you very much. And that is like this summary slide of what we have heard in this webinar. We start here from the right. So you are talking about the importance of automating this, making sure it's available, the data for customers, and have access in the management team to really drive this through, because it is a big change for the companies, the manufacturers, right? So then I want to move to the two speakers here to get your final takeaways. So if I go to Madeleine first, because we also have a question to you, if Tacton are going to provide support in the configurator for supporting customers to do this more sustainable purchases.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we are developing right now, the capability to integrate the configurator, the CPQ software with life cycle assessment software. So we're working with a huge, large, one of the large vendors on, doing this, so to say. And then, of course, the beauty of it is that once you have the results and you can show it to the customer at the point of purchase and balance the impact on the environment together with the technical specifications and the price and so on, to bring it forward, to bring the data forward in the configurator, that is the new innovation here, I would say.
So the partnership is core, and then of course for us as vendors, it is key that we have manufacturers who are leading this change and having the vision, as you are explaining here, Stephanie. So do you want to give a final takeaway or an advice to your peers in manufacturing how to make this moving?
Sure. And thank you for that, Suzanne. So, my advice to others in manufacturing is this is coming. It's coming, whether you think you're ready for it or not. And I would strongly advise you to start thinking about the toolkit you're going to need to be a more sustainable business, because it takes time. We're doing this. I've mentioned to you that we care a lot about sustainability, but we're looking at this as an investment in the future. We know the regulations are coming in the EU and North America for certain, and they are going to spread through the rest of the world. This is going to be how business is done in the future, and you're going to need tools to be able to provide this information. If you're a supplier, you're going to have to provide it to the people who buy from you. So that's what I would leave people with, is start thinking about, how am I going to approach sustainability in my business? We're all going to have to.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask you, Stephanie, since you are operating globally, can you see any differences between different areas in the world? Europe
Absolutely.
Compared to North America, for example?
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because, definitely regulations are happening in the EU right now. They are there, more are coming. So I would say the EU is leading from a regulatory perspective, and that is a big market driver in the EU. North America is not quite there, but what I think is going to happen is it isn't only going to be driven by regulations. And so I don't want to give the impression that this is only cared about in the EU. We're seeing it everywhere. It's being driven in different ways. In a lot of the emerging markets, you just have businesses that want to do things more sustainably, because it also sometimes is a major cost savings to do things more sustainably. People want to reduce waste. They have other environmental drivers and other interests. And so we're seeing this globally. We have to do it in the EU to stay competitive, but we have other reasons driving us in other parts of the world. And most people want to do the right thing, is what it boils down to. And they want to do business with the people who do the right thing.
So we have another question. Actually, we are running over, but I think we can just pick up on those questions. And for those of you who have to leave, thank you for attending. And we will continue a little bit with the questions, so you can tune in afterwards, since this is a recorded event that will be available afterwards. So Martina, we have a question to you. How does a modified LCA work? Does it need to be externally audited?
Typically, when you want to have a verified and externally used result out of it, that you don't want to use only internally for improving your product, then we are working on verifying the model. So the model goes through a verification process and a critical review, so that the verifier not only looks at one result, but it looks how we set up the linkages between parameters and the data. So it's a very thorough process that enables the credibility. So yes, it goes to a certain type of critical review, but it's a different.
So a follow-up question to that is, how long does it take to set up an LCA system similar to what you have presented here for Xylem?
That really depends on the complexity of the product and on the availability of data within the company already. So how mature the data environment within the company is. And so it's normally not days. So we are always talking about months, but not years, typically.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add to that. That has what Martina described has been our experience so far. You don't realize how much work it is to get the data. You think, I have an ERP, I have all the bills of materials, I know who all my suppliers are, but it really does take time to make sure those data are in the right format and complete enough to get into the model. The first time you do that is the hardest. Now that we're prepared for it, we're actually improving our internal processes and finding ways to automate it. And so I think when we get really good at it, it's going to take probably 2 to 4 weeks to do a really detailed, complete model. I think when we get good at it, we're not there yet, but the setup process does take some months.
So you better get started and start to prepare for it, right?
Yeah. Right.
So a final question to you, Madeleine. You touched upon this Green Deal Act and the IRA in US, the Inflation Reduction Act, that is providing some funding to support a more sustainable product in the future. How can you make yourself eligible for this fund if you are considering to use this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I just wanted also to say that, because I wanted to interrupt you there before, with modified LCAs, going back to that one, I was just thinking we are talking about using maybe the energy for the use phase, aren't we? Like you concentrate on one part of the life cycle and so on.
It depends. You concentrate where it matters, and in the case of Xylem, you concentrate on the use phase because energy is key. But it could be that material choices matter as well, and that a certain configuration of the pump has an influence on one or the other. And so it's not one parameter normally. It's maybe several, and maybe many.
Okay.
And that's
I thought we wanted to kind of describe that a bit more. So back to your question, Susanne, and thank you for asking. You said, the three of us, can we kind of help with, for companies to get this funding? And I would say yes, because when you look at why have all of this money been set aside, it is because the societies, both in the US and in the EU, they want to see, green technology, if I may use that word. So good technology being developed and the societies kind of being developed in the right direction. So, and then there are lots of competing ideas out there. So how do you know that the idea that can get the funds is the best idea? So you need the same nomenclature, if you want, the same term, speaking about it in similar terms and so on. And that's why you have the EU taxonomy, which is a kind of it describes what is a green investment or a green technology and what is not, what is eligible to receive those funds, for instance. And when the three of us combine our kind of expertise, we help the customer because we say that the life cycle assessment is made, and part of the cradle to gate impact is shown in the configurator for a product from Xylem, and then in the documentation you get the carbon dioxide footprint that the selling company can use in their reporting. Then that report can be the foundation also for trying to get funds out of the huge funds that EU and the US have put aside. So it's all connected.
Thank you very much for that last words, Madeleine, and thanks to all of you three speakers. It has been a pleasure to listen to you and also experience how strong a partnership actually can be when you are driving towards the same goals.